Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, who is Melissa Rethlefsen, who is an associate librarian and a deputy director at the Eccles Health Science Library here at the university. Prior to her current position, she was the education technology librarian at the Mayo Clinic's Mayo Medical School. She's also worked at the Minnesota Department of Health's RN Barr Library and the University of Minnesota's Biomedical Library. She has written extensively about social media and using technology in education. She's also authored the book, Internet Cool Tools for Physicians. She managed many social media training opportunities for the Mayo Clinic, for which she was named a Library Journal Mover and Shaker in 2009. Her current research focuses on systematic review methodology and bibliometrics. She still, however, remains engaged in technology outreach and training. Melissa's presentation today is What's on the Horizon? Trends and Trials in Educational Technology. It's my great pleasure to ask Melissa, my good colleague, to come up to the podium.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that gracious welcome, and thanks to all of you for being here today. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today to talk about educational technology. As Alberta mentioned, my previous position was educational technology librarian at the Mayo Clinic, and this, I felt, gave me free license to basically explore and do whatever I wanted with educational technology. So that's basically what led to my interest in technology, which has continued since then. So back in 2006, I had the opportunity to go to a conference called eLearn. Has anyone here ever been to eLearn before? It's an educational technology conference. It's an international conference. And at that time, I went there to present a project called Social Networking Goes to Medical School. And basically, our project was put together in order to give medical students a secure place where they could share their thoughts with one another, where they could go on, express their ideas, where they could talk with one another about what types of courses they wanted to do, and the end product ended up being an installation of LiveJournal, which is an open source software, social network, and this is what it looked like. So it was kind of hideously ugly, I'm not gonna lie. And that is what I got to go to this eLearn conference to talk about. And it also kind of helped that it was in Hawaii. So that made it all the better. So the reason why I bring up this conference is, for me, it was a bit of a watershed moment. There were a couple of things that I took away from this presentation that I thought were pretty valuable lessons. So first of all, does anyone know what this is a map of, other than Hawaii? That would be cheating. That would be too easy. Good guess. Any other thoughts? Earthquake activity. Okay, so the conference took place October 13th through 18th, and on October 16th, 2006, there was a 6.7 on the Richter scale earthquake in Hawaii, right off of the coast of the Big Island, but it did shut off the power in Oahu for almost an entire day during the conference. So one of the things that I really got to learn pretty quickly that I think was a good lesson was never to go to a conference without bringing cash. It had not occurred to me at all that with the fact that there would be an earthquake, that all power would be off. So my cash card and my credit card wasn't going to be helpful at all. So I got to spend the day driving around the island. Luckily, I had rented a car, which was fantastic, trying to find a place with a generator that would actually be able to power itself so that it would be open and we could eat. It was kind of an interesting day, and it was also a very surreal experience because being in the middle of Waikiki when there is absolutely no power on in the dark is the most surreal possible experience you could ever have. It is just mind-blowingly weird. So, in addition to the earthquake knowledge that I gained, the presentation itself was also a really interesting moment for me, because by the time that we went to present about this project, we basically already knew that it was a failure. We had a couple of ideas on how we could sustain it going forward. This is an actual slide from my presentation talking about some of those ideas that we could take forward to really sustain this, to not waste our time that we had spent developing and promoting and teaching everyone how to use this tool. But basically we knew at that point that the writing was on the wall, that this project was essentially dead. It ended up having been too hard for people to use. It was something where students didn't really see a need for it, and the faculty and administration who had originally requested that we produce this product decided that it just wasn't worth their time either. They basically had wanted a really simple, user-friendly interface with all of the security measures in place, but they wanted it done by a group of student developers, which is just, not going to happen. So for me, this whole presentation was a really good lesson in letting go, that it was okay to try something and to fail, but then to also learn from it. But I think that although those lessons were really important, the thing that really stuck in my mind that I remember most, maybe even more so than Waikiki in the dark, were the cell phones. So this is an international conference, as I mentioned before, and because it was in Hawaii, there were a lot of educators there from Japan. And in 2006, as pretty much today, I imagine, Japanese cell phone technology was far, far ahead of ours. At least certainly it was ahead of mine. I'm not 100% sure I had a cell phone at that point, and if I did, it was probably a pay-as-you-go track phone. But one of the sessions that I attended at this conference was actually from a group of Japanese educators who had developed a way for cell phones to be used as an audience response system. So they essentially they texted in something and somehow it would magically appear on the screen, and had a lot of technology behind it that I don't really remember. But at the time, that was pretty insanely mind-blowing. Now maybe it's something that we almost would take for granted, but at the time it was pretty amazing. But what blew my mind even more, that still has stuck with me to this day, was seeing for the first time someone take a photo of a conference slide with their phone. It's like, wow, how did that happen? It wouldn't have even occurred to me to do that at the time, but now I think we can all pretty much say that I bet everyone in this room has done something like that. I take photos of receipts, I take photos of conference slides, I take photos of things that are on the whiteboard, all from my phone or my iPad. But back then, it was pretty amazing. So what does this have to do with the Horizon Report? Well, the Horizon Report, which I'm going to discuss in detail in a few more minutes, is all about technology trends. Trends that take a long time to materialize, and then also trends that just seem to come out of nowhere and take you by surprise. But yet they completely change our educational landscape. And in 2006, at this conference, I was right in the middle of an explosion of trends that was going to come and shape our culture and our educational landscape for many, many years to come. So now we are going to play a little game. And the game is called Before or After Melissa's presentation in October of 2006. So for each of the technologies that I am going to show, I want you to call out whether or not it was actually released to the public before or after October of 2006. So is everyone ready? All right, we're going to start with an easy one. The iPhone. After. Absolutely. It came out June 29th, 2007. So it was not that far after, but it was one of the reasons why cell phones were so surprising to me at that conference. Okay, so that was an easy one. So how about a smartphone? Okay, so first reaction after, second reaction before?
First generation before.
Before, okay. Let's just say it's before. All right, before would be accurate. Does anyone have a guess as to what year the first cell phone came out, or the first smartphone came out? You are the closest. The first one was actually released in Japan in 1999. The first one in America was in 2000. So, and it was released by Ericsson. All right, so YouTube, before or after October 2006?
Before.
Okay, absolutely, before. It was first conceived in February 2005. It was actually released to the public May 2005, and its watershed moment was 5 days before my presentation when Google purchased it on October 9th, 2006. And that is when YouTube essentially became legitimized and had the power to do what it has done in our lives today. All right, how about Facebook? Before. Okay, so it was definitely before, and you may have seen the social network and know all about the dates and the time frame for Facebook. It was actually first released in May of 2004. How about when was Facebook first released to the public? After? Before. It was released to the public September 29th, 2006. So less than a month before my presentation. So when that happened, basically my LiveJournal site became totally worthless. So that is one of the reasons we knew it was a complete failure going in. Okay, Twitter, before or after October 2006? All right, I hear a couple of one or two befores and mostly afters. It is before. It was March 21st, 2006 was the first tweet. I actually didn't hear about it until 2007. I created my account in April of 2007, which is, I think, by the time it had started to hit some of the early adopters. But yes, before. Pretty surprising, isn't it? Doesn't it seem like it's a new technology still? Google Scholar, especially for those librarians in the room. When was that? Before or after October 2006? Before. Yep, that came out November of 2004. So that has actually been around for a long time. So another Google product, Google Docs, before or after October 2006? Okay. That would be, it depends. Okay. Did anyone here in the audience ever use Rethlefsen? Other than me? Okay. So Rethlefsen was the genesis of Google Docs, and it was released in August of 2005. And it was purchased by Google in August of 2006. They had released Google Spreadsheets, which is now called Google Sheets, in June of 2006. And then they released the presentations module in September 2007. But it was really not released from beta, any of those three products, until July of 2009. So those of you who said after, yes. Those of you who said before, yes, also. It really depends for that one. Okay, the iPad. After. Okay, after. Does anyone know what year it was released? It was 2010. Does that not seem like that was way too recently? It seems to me like the tablet computing has come a long way. All right, here's another one. Wikipedia, before or after October 2006? Before. Anyone want to guess what year? 99. Ooh, you went really old school on that. No, 2001. January 2001 is when Wikipedia came out. And it has maintained the exact same technology structure since then, which is why it is really annoying to use if you're trying to actually edit anything. All right, so here's another one. Blogs, before or after 2006? Before. Okay, want to guess a year on this one? Was it before or after Wikipedia? Let's just say that. Before, right. The first blog was actually released in 1998. Open Diary was the first blogging platform. The two that are pretty much set the standard, though, were LiveJournal and Blogger. They were both introduced in 1999. That's when I had my first Blogger blog. And then WordPress was released in 2003. So it actually came quite a bit later, but blogging had been a very well-established technology all the way before 2006. So. All right, iTunes U, so the university-centric component of iTunes. All right, this one had a little dissension here. The answer is after. It came out May 30th, 2007, but iTunes itself came out in 2001, and then the store version, so the online component, was in 2003. All right, World of Warcraft. Before, yes, 2004. Blizzard Entertainment released it in 2004. All right, how about the flipped classroom? All right, I heard a couple of befores, a couple of afters. It is, in fact, after, but it has been around since 2007 is when the first flipped classroom was actually discussed. So to me, this seems like a really new thing that people have only been talking about it for maybe 3 or 4 years, but no, it's been around since 2007. All right, so we talked about iPhones and iPads. How about the touch screen in general? All right, yes, before, absolutely before, and it was actually first introduced in 1965. The first home computer with a touch screen was in 1983. The Apple Newton, which was the first touchscreen tablet, in 1993. And the Palm in 1996, and the first tablet computer from Windows was in 2002. So tablet computing and touchscreen computing has been around for a really long time. Does anyone want to guess where the touchscreen was first invented? It was military, which is pretty much where most technology comes from in a lot of these cases. All right, last but not least, Dropbox, before or after October 2006? After, quite a bit after. It was actually not released until September of 2008. Yet it seems like this is something, to me, that is so common now that it's surprising to me that it took so long to actually come about. All right, so why discuss those dates? Basically, it's because the Horizon Report is all about time. It outlines the timelines for the adoption of technology. And when it's talking about the adoption of technology, it's looking specifically at educational institutions, but it wants to know when they would figure that 20% of educational institutions would have adopted that technology. So it's not talking about mainstream adoption, it's talking about those early adopters in educational institutions. They look specifically at 3 different time horizons, and they will identify 2 technologies per time horizon. So for every report that has come out since 2004, they have 2 technologies that they foresee being adopted within a year, 2 within 2 to 3 years, and 2 within 4 to 5 years. So again, they're looking at these time horizons. And when they're looking at technology, they're not just looking at technology that was developed for educational institutions. They're looking at consumer-oriented technology. They are looking at educationally oriented technology. They're also looking at hardware. They're looking at infrastructure. They're looking at software. They're looking at web-based technology, all of these different forms of educational and emerging technology. And this report on 6 technologies have to have implications for education, even if those implications may not already be in practice, or if it may not even be intuitive that these could be used in an educational setting. So beginning in 2005, they also introduced in the executive summary some key trends that informed their decisions about these technologies. So the first report was basically just, these are the 6 technologies that we foresee. Then they started putting those technologies within context of the overall technology trends happening across society. And then in 2006, so 2 years after it was introduced, they also added a critical challenges section. And the critical challenges section was really there to talk about what the barriers might be that would prevent those technologies from being put into practice in educational institutions. And it wasn't really until the 2014 report that the key trends and the critical challenges got as much time in the report as the technologies themselves did. So this is just an overview of what the Horizon Report has predicted per year, and I know you're not expected to read this, so, but basically what it is just showing by year what they predicted would happen in that year. So this is not the year of the report, it's the year that they predicted things would happen. And as it goes Older to newer, I have increased the density of the text and also the size of it. So the ones that are the most recent are the largest. The other ones, basically, I think that we can almost 100% say have been, in fact, incorporated, and that we think that they're self-evident at this point. But they have a lot of trends that they have pulled out as well. And so the things that are in bold are the times when things have shown up either 2 times or 3 times or 4 times even within the context of these Horizon reports. And so, for example, gaming has shown up repeatedly throughout the lifespan of the Horizon report. It first showed up predicted to be here and adopted by 2008, then it showed up again in 2009, then they changed it to the massive multiplayer educational gaming, because the World of Warcraft is on their minds, for 2012. And then 2014, game-based learning was reintroduced, and we will see it again later for more future predictions. Another one that shows up a lot strikes me that they weren't entirely sure what terminology to use or how these technologies related to each other or how they were differentiated from each other. And those were context-aware computing and augmented reality. So context-aware computing, which is the idea that you have your phone or your laptop or wherever, and it maybe can sense your location, maybe it knows some things about the environment, and then can tailor your experience to that kind of context that it sits within. And augmented reality being the idea that there's an overlay of some sort of virtual setting on top of reality. So the biggest example that I can think of for augmented reality that I've actually used is, has anyone ever here used the Yelp app? Okay, have you ever used the Yelp monocle? Okay, so there is an Easter egg in the Yelp app called the Yelp monocle, and you can hold up your phone, have the camera pointing down a street, and then it will pop up all of the restaurant reviews that are down that street, so you can see exactly what restaurant down there that you might want to go to. So it can sense your location, and then it overlays that extra kind of information onto reality. So it's pretty sweet. But they first had predicted these things would happen in 2009, then 2010, then 2011, and they split them out again. And it has shown up again as happening in 2013 and 2014. And smart objects are basically the same as context-aware objects. But instead of just being computers, they're now talking about actual objects. So whether it's your thermostat at home or other different types of objects that are aware of the context around them. But the ones that I think were actually the most interesting are those technologies that they predicted would happen within 1 year. And I've just highlighted a couple of things here. Mobile shows up constantly as something that would happen within 1 year. And sometimes this was predicated by another use of that term. So mobile phones shows up. It was first introduced actually as phones in their pockets way back in like 2007, I think. But it struck me that some of these things sort of took the people by surprise, that they weren't really sure. The technology moved so fast that they hadn't really predicted that these things would have come about. And the two that, in addition to the mobile and the tablet computing, that really strike me as surprises are cloud computing, which had never been mentioned or even thought about in the previous Horizon reports, and also massive open online courses, which I think took the whole educational system by surprise. So just looking at a few things that they were predicted to happen in 2015, they gave us a little bit of wiggle room on some of them. So if it doesn't happen this year, don't worry. You are safe. You might be able to also have them adopted by 2016 or 2017 in some cases. Are gesture-based computing, so like the Microsoft Kinect, the Wii, where you can interact with the computer by touching in space or moving. Visual data analysis, which I think here at the university we probably have well in hand with the Ski Institute. Game-based learning, again, that showed up again. Learning analytics, which is the idea that we want to learn about what our students are learning in order to help them achieve more. And the flipped classroom idea, which we talked about a little bit. So we'll see if these happen by the end of the year, whether or not these three trends are going to be widely adopted. But we, again, have a little wiggle room if not. So the 2014 Horizon report itself, again, I mentioned earlier that it was a little bit different than some of the previous reports, because not only did it talk about the key technologies, but it gave equal airtime to the trends that were going to impact education and the key challenges. And they really had a focus on how the trends and the technologies and the challenges all were going to impact specifically teaching, learning, and creative inquiry. So the questions that they asked themselves when they were starting to put together the 2014 report were, which key technologies would be most important to teaching, learning, and creative inquiry in the next 5 years? Again, looking at that longer time horizon. Which ones should educational institutions, all educational institutions, be using broadly? And which technologies from consumer, entertainment, and industry should educational institutions be looking for ways to apply in education? And what technologies are developing to the point where we as educators should be taking notice of those technologies? They really emphasize a few different categories of technology. They look at consumer technologies, which I already mentioned. They also look at digital strategies, so ways to take those types of technologies and incorporate them into society. They look at internet technologies. They do specifically look at learning technologies as well, so those technologies developed with an educational intent or purpose in mind. Social media technologies, visualization technologies, and enabling technologies. So I'm just going to quick go over some of the challenges and the trends that they identified. So for the key trends, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because I think that we live in the society, we're pretty much familiar with a lot of these trends. The trends that they identified were ubiquitous social media, so the idea that pretty much all educational institutions at this point have some sort of social media going on. The integration of online, hybrid, and collaborative learning. So I think here using Canvas, we're all pretty familiar with how integrated those types of things can be into our education. The concept that learning and assessment really need to be data-driven, and that's a larger societal trend as well, not just for education, but that things really need data to back them up, and using big data in order to assess things and be able to create change. The concept of students as creators instead of consumers is, I think, one that's been around for a really long time now, but is really becoming more relevant as educational systems are changing to try to adapt to a type of system where students are just sitting in the seats and absorbing knowledge versus going out and actually creating that knowledge. Agile change or agile approaches to change is an idea that educational institutions have really adopted from the business arena. So looking at things like lean startups and agile change systems for businesses. So looking at how you invent things, how you change processes, and that's a trend that they identified, as well as just the overall evolution of online learning. And specifically what they were talking about there, which I had to actually read in some detail because I wasn't quite sure what they meant, was the idea that there is a lot more video, like synchronous video, so using Google Hangouts, for example, in order to really engage online courses, using voice technology, again, to have more synchronous types of conversations, instead of online learning really just being asynchronous, which it had largely been in the past. The key technologies that they identified, I've put here in order of the horizon. So the one that they'll predict that will happen next year are the top two, followed by the two that are on the 2 to 3 year time horizon, and then the last ones, which I tried to make fuzzy but ended up just looking a little bold, are the 4 to 5 year trends. And I think that pretty much everyone is probably familiar with the flipped classroom concept by now, but it's essentially the idea that students don't come to class to get lectured, but they do a lot of their learning outside of class and then come to class to more deeply engage with that material through discussion, through deeper questions that allow them to challenge the material and to really to bring it in to their thought processes. Learning analytics, essentially the idea that if it's a way for students who might be failing or need different pathways of learning as they're going through a course can branch out in different ways or be marked for needing extra assistance. The idea that we can use the technology that the students are interacting with in order to really influence their learning strategies. 3D printing, again, I think that most of us are pretty familiar with. And of course, if you need to use a 3D printer, the Marriott Library and the Eccles Library both have 3D printers that faculty here can use. And games and gamification, again, shows up. This is now, I think, the 6th time that it has shown up in the Horizon report. It's obviously something that they think is a major trend, but one I think that has not yet necessarily been articulated well enough for most people to adopt it. And the 4 to 5 year trends, those are always the ones where there might not actually be an identified use for those yet in education. So those are the ones that are always a little out there. But certainly there are major trends that have impacted other parts of society that they anticipate will then be in education at some point. So the first one is quantified self. So how many of you here are wearing a Fitbit? Couple of you. How many of you here use a smartphone to track your steps or your diet, that kind of stuff? Okay, so then you all know all about quantified self because that is what the idea of quantified self is self-tracking of some sort, whether or not it's through these small things that you can wear on your wrist, whether or not it's through your phone, but the idea that people love to learn about themselves and then they can track and quantify that kind of data to then make decisions. Now, there's a lot of implications, I think, for quantified self when you're talking about healthcare and medicine. That's going to be huge. I don't think that there's any denying that. How it's going to be impactful in education, I think, remains to be seen. There's certainly a lot of uses out there, but one of the big challenges with the quantified self movement in education is the privacy issues that are inherent in all of that kind of self-tracking. The last one that they identified was virtual assistants, and that has to do with Siri. So anyone here have an iPhone that has Siri on it? So the idea that you can talk to the computer and then that computer can do things for you. And how that's going to be used in education, again, I think is not well known at this point, but it is a major trend that is coming down. And it's essentially an enabling technology. So it will enable students who maybe don't interact as well with the keyboard, maybe have visual impairment, who can actually utilize some of these technologies in the same way that their classmates can. But there could be other uses as well. There are many, many opportunities. And then they identified the key challenges. And I'm not really going to go into all of these either. But I will say that for the key challenges, they've broken these out into sections as well. So the first 2, they figure, are solvable challenges. And then they move down in complexity to the bottom 2 that they consider to be wicked challenges. So challenges that we don't really fully understand what the problem is, and challenges that we really have no idea at this point how to solve. So there are a range of different challenges here, and I'm not going to go over them in detail. But the one that I think that we can do the most about is the low digital fluency of faculty. So first of all, what is digital fluency? Can anyone give me a definition? How would you define digital fluency?
Is it the ability to use these technologies or to find and collaborate with the people who know how to use them?
That is a great answer. Yep. Anyone else? Just to repeat, she said the ability to use these technologies and to find and collaborate with other people who use them, essentially.
I would just add to use them most appropriately to actually benefit.
Okay, so to use these technologies most appropriately for benefit.
I would add the ability to pick it up quickly or teach yourself how to use it.
Oh, that's a great one. So the ability to pick it up quickly or to teach yourself how to use it.
I would say the ability to integrate it into the other aspects of your life, so it's natural.
Interesting. The ability to integrate it into other aspects of your life so that it's natural.
Know enough about it so that when you use it in your teaching, you're not fumbling through and the students can use it no problem.
Okay, so to know enough about it that you can teach with it and the students can easily use it as well. So I think all of those are probably very good definitions of what digital fluency is. I think it's maybe one of those things where you kind of know it when you see it as well. Like, yeah, that makes sense, digital fluency, okay. But essentially, that's all of those answers were absolutely correct. So it's the idea that you're familiar with technology, that you're literate about using different technologies, and then the higher step would be that you can actually incorporate those technologies into your daily life, into your educational practice, so that they are really more a part of what you do on a day-to-day basis. So not only, though, did the Horizon report look and identify what these challenges are, but they also gave a few ideas for what solutions there might be for faculty who have low digital fluency. So one of the things that they suggested is that we, as faculty, learn from students, so that we partner with students to learn what technologies are out there, what technologies are popular, and then we, in turn, can teach them how to use them in a way that is digitally literate, so that we can teach them how to best use them for education, for learning. They also suggest, which I thought was great, that faculty work with librarians to learn about these technologies and to also help and practice and build confidence in using these technologies. And many libraries across the country, academic libraries in particular, certainly have made this a huge part of what we offer. So it was great to see that come out in the Horizon report. Some schools also have boot camps where faculty can come in and learn in like a week's time period, all sorts of different technologies. Other institutions might have things like professional development communities, whether or not it's actually physical communities, or it could be digital communities as well, but places where faculty can go and learn and talk with one another and learn from each other in order to do that. But I think the biggest key for all of that is really the idea of having institutional support for faculty to really be able to learn about these technologies and to incorporate them. And that has a lot to do with some of the other challenges that they mentioned, like the relative lack of rewards for teaching in our educational systems. But one of the reasons that I think low digital fluency exists is because a lot of people don't know whether or not they should jump on the bandwagon or off the bandwagon, because technology changes so fast. I imagine that there are a lot of people in this room who have thought to themselves, well, I'm not going to bother to learn this technology because who knows if it exists in a few years, right? So why bother? And I think that that's a really fair question. How do you know whether to invest time in learning about these technologies? When are you just jumping on the bandwagon for the idea of being on the bandwagon and the sake of following a trend rather than doing it for real purposes to improve your teaching? So let's go back to the key technologies for a moment here. These are the ones, again, that the 2014 Horizon report predicts are coming our way, but I think that we may need a reminder that not all of these technologies are going to be valuable for every educator and for every discipline. So, for example, 3D printing might be really applicable in medicine and architecture and design, all of those different types of fields. It might not be as applicable for English majors. I suspect probably a few English majors out there could use 3D printing to their benefit, but it's probably not something that all faculty need to learn how to use. We don't need to all go out and know how to do CAD drawings and figure out those types of technologies. So technologies really need to be assessed critically before we adopt them to make sure that they really meet our pedagogical goals. So looking back at the Horizon Report's predictions for the past years makes it really clear, I think, that education is not the driving force behind many of the technologies or technology strategies that they've identified. The commercial, the entertainment industry, industrial and military applications really are what is driving many of these technologies to wide adoption. But if educational institutions aren't flexible enough to recognize the potential of these technologies and plan for the technology trends of the future, students are simply not going to see the relevance of their education to their lives. So some of the key predictions of the Horizon Report have come to pass in ways I think that back in 2004 or 2005, in the early days of the Horizon Report, that maybe wouldn't have even imagined that would have happened. So, for example, the predictions for 2006, which I realize are miniature and grayed out here, are pretty much integral to the way that we do business here on campus. And those two predictions were ubiquitous wireless, which I imagine many of you in the room are using right now, or at least one of you, and extended learning, which was their term at the time for blended learning, or combining the physical components of education with some online supplemental components. So here we're using Canvas for most of our courses, and that is certainly the extended learning that they had imagined. Mobile computing, mobile broadband, and mobile apps have also completely changed the way that most of us and our students interact with the world. Our phones and our tablets serve a huge role in our lives, and I'm not really sure I remember what I did before I accessed Google on my phone. Did I just save up all those questions that I had for later and when I had a computer or in a reference book? Or did I just not actually get answers to most of my questions? I'm not sure. I don't really remember, because now it has become so integral to how I act. If I don't know what something is, I just sit there and look it up. So it's made going to restaurants a lot more helpful when I don't know what they're talking about on their menus. So basically what I'm trying to say is that as educators, we really can't ignore the technological reality that surrounds us and our students. My 3-year-old already is completely adept at zipping through all the photos on my iPhone. It's totally intuitive to him. And he doesn't really understand why you would talk on a phone without a video in it. So I'll try to have him talk to his grandma, and he'll just take the phone, he'll hold it out, and he'll try and look at it, and he doesn't understand why she's not sitting there talking to him on the phone. So it's coming. It's a different reality than when many of us were younger. So if we try to stay current with technology, though, and especially if we are trying to innovate with technology, we are sometimes bound to fail. That's a fail whale, for those of you who may not recognize it. But maybe it's even more likely that if we're going to try to innovate in technology that we're going to fail. And I would say that my foray into social networking for medical students, that was the subject of my 2006 presentation, was in fact a failure. It was a failure on many levels. It was in many ways too soon for that to happen, but it was also too old. We were using a really clunky technology. It was hard to use. You had to be really pretty determined in order to figure out how it worked. And some of the students had come from institutions where Facebook already existed, so they knew that it could be easy and it could be really intuitive. So really, it was really negative of a comparison. So it was a failure, but it was the failure that we learned a lot from. And really, the idea also didn't die from after that. In 2009, which is less than 2 years after Facebook went public, the Mayo Medical School was using Facebook as a replacement for a huge portion of their new student orientation. So they went from having like 2 weeks of new student orientation to having like 3 days, because they figured that by using Facebook and setting up these communities for them, the students already knew all about each other. They'd already built the teams that they needed in order to succeed once they got to medical school. And they bragged about it on YouTube, which I found really ironic, because like 2 years before that, Mayo had said we would never use YouTube. It was horrible. So I found it very interesting to watch how quickly that changed. For most of us, teaching itself is an experiment. So we are continually trying to adopt our teaching methods to achieve the learning outcomes that we really want our students to achieve. And using technology where it meets and helps achieve those learning outcomes can only help, even if sometimes we do end up failing. So I would say that sometimes you might be ahead of the bandwagon, sometimes you might be behind the bandwagon, sometimes you might even feel the need to jump right on the bandwagon. But I encourage you to pay attention to the technological trends in our society and use them to enhance your teaching, learning, and creative inquiry. And I also recommend that you bring cash when you go to conferences. All right. So thank you very much.